Okay, well, hi, Jackson. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So, we are talking a little bit about how your journey was through the COVID pandemic. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey and about your work?
Yeah, especially as it relates to the pandemic. I think the pandemic is what kind of like elevated or amplified the work
Yeah.
that I was doing. It was very personal, something I was doing for like self soothing when I was working a stressful job at the end of 2019 and I left. And so when the pandemic hit, I already had like this um, kind of had this thing going on for me already with the self-soothing, and it's just dragging a pen across paper. It's very meditative for me. And as things started to get like a little more claustrophobic, so my wife and I share this studio apartment. Um, Making it so that she could continue doing grad school, and she was doing a fellowship with the Red Cross,
Nice.
and making sure that I'm not being like loud in the background or like doing too much. It was like putting on my headphones and getting very, very internal and really invested in the pieces. And I was churning out so many of them. Like I roll out a piece of paper on the table and I just spend hours on it. And then when it's done, roll it up, put it away, roll out another piece. And I
Mhm.
just acquired several of them, and like they're up on my walls, like the ones behind me,
Mhm.
just kind of covering the place. And then right when things started to like open up in the summer, it was like when everybody got vaccinated.
Right.
um, People that lived in my building, we those were like the first interactions I was having, was like people that were already in the building, and we were sharing like what we did, what we've been doing during the pandemic. Like
Mhm.
someone was making ice cream, and someone else got really into photography, and I showed my drawings. And then from there, I was getting so much encouragement. I was seeing reactions from people that I totally didn't expect. So in August, I just like on a whim, I applied for an art fair, and it was 3 weeks out from that art fair starting. So I'm
Right.
like, I'm not going to get it, but like I'm gonna feel good about having applied for something. And
Mhm.
then they got back to me immediately, and I had a show, and it was just all very fast. It just feels kind of like a whirlwind.
Wow, and that is absolutely amazing, and I remember meeting you at
Yeah.
Superfine Art Fair, and I was just absolutely astonished, and to hear that this is how you basically started your journey was through the pandemic is really, a turning point because a lot of artists that I have spoken to, they're very many of them were like encompassed by like an emotional bypass. Like, I can't do this, I don't want to do it, but it seems like it was just flowing for you, that was perhaps your escape, you could say.
Oh, it was. I mean, the idea of showing it to people through the lens of art or calling myself an artist never occurred to me.
Hmm.
I was watching the interview with Paul.
Hmm.
Cannot recall his last name at the moment, but he said there's something he said about it's a natural evolution, but you don't know that until it's finished.
Right.
And that's what happened. It's like, oh, tell your story. And when I look back, um, I mean, I was an art student in college, and I went to an arts high school. So I have like the academic brain for the arts. And then when
Right.
I turned around and looked at my story, I'm like, yeah, that's how it goes. That's a very natural evolution, except when you're in it, you don't know what's happening.
Right.
So seeing people react to work that I created when I was suffering. It was really deeply emotionally like every mark that I made was there to help me feel okay in the space, like during a crisis. And
Hmm.
then to not even have to say that to people, for them to just look at it and say, I can feel what you were going through, is that's the best part. Like communicating through abstract art, and
Yeah.
people don't need to be told what it means, is really powerful.
Oh, absolutely. And I feel that by your work, you really touched a lot of people, it seems, especially within your building. I think that's a
Yeah.
beautiful thing that a lot of people never really had the chance to do. Everyone was just so isolated that when they were coming out, it was kind of like, well, how do I interact in society again, but you already had that niche, which is amazing to just kind of connect with people on that level.
Mhm.
So can you talk a little bit about where you were finding your inspiration for the works? Were there any limiting factors being, contained in your apartment? I remember you mentioning some of the architecture,
Yeah.
and from our previous conversation.
Yeah. So I kind of see my works as daydreaming on paper. I can't, visualize in my mind, like when I close my eyes, I just see black, but I'm a
Mhm,
lucid dreamer. And I remember a lot of my dreams. And when I reflect on my dreams, they are clearly just a mishmash of the things that I experienced during my day-to-day. And so then when I started looking at the drawings, not because I noticed it, but because other people did. They're like, wow, this reminds me of like, did you ever study urban planning? And I'm like,
mhm,
no. Oh, wait, this totally looks like when you're in a plane and
mhm.
you see the different, like the patchwork of farms and things, like when you're flying over like middle America, which
Yep.
is what I was doing right before the pandemic. And I had that really stressful job.
Mhm,
But then during the pandemic, it became so specifically about the architecture in my neighborhood. Like
mhm,
when I'm creating a piece, they're really big so that I can just focus like on these smaller parts and I'm not looking at the whole. But then when I step back, it's like looking at a dream and going, well, that's obvious now. This is the
mm,
church that's right across from my building that I've
right.
been looking at day in and day out.
Oh my
And so when I turn around and make a piece and it kind of resembles stained glass, or people are asking me, like, oh, do you have an architecture background? Um, it's like, well, yes, I do. I've been walking around in it, trying to
Yeah.
be entertained by it, so I don't go crazy. Yeah,
Mhm,
so the inspiration subconsciously has been very much the physical space of like my neighborhood in Crown Heights.
mhm.
But the movements were just inspired by a need to get in touch with my body. Like I go for long walks, but walking, if all you're doing is walking, that is itself pretty static. So how do I have I needed to make an excuse to like swing my body around and like,
Mhm.
really feel body movement. And the only difference is like I just had a pen at the end of my arm while I was making that movement. And then when I'm not thinking about what I'm drawing and I'm just thinking about twisting from the hip and
Mhm.
swinging my shoulder out like this and bringing my foot underneath the table and pushing back because it's fun and it
Mhm.
feels fun. And then I step back and it looks like architecture.
Right.
Just it's a thrill that I really needed in
Mhm.
order to have that mental escape from the reality.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh God, I believe me, I could understand that. And I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of escapism and going from your 9 to 5 and entering your artistic journey. I think a lot of people are a little concerned with doing that, maybe a little hesitant. Even some artists who are thinking about taking the leap and reaching out to gallerists or art
Mhm.
advisors. What can you say to them that you've experienced that kind of pushed yourself to do that?
That pushed me to do it. It was sharing the work, I think being open to letting people in to see what you did during the pandemic or what you're doing to self-soothe in any time.
Mhm,
Because before the pandemic, that job was so crushing, that I needed an escape so that I, didn't say something stupid during a meeting. That's literally why I was like, okay, I have this energy. I'm at this job where like things aren't really going the way I think they should, but I can't really leave right now. But I
mhm,
need to find a way to manage my emotions. And
mhm,
so at first, like they weren't big drawings, they were just like in a notepad. And I would channel all my energy into these drawings. So I was like doing it while I was on trips, while I was flying cross country.
mhm,
And so a lot of those smaller works are definitely like a reflection of that tension. But it was first, my wife, she can see the work, but then, you know, I if I liked something and take a picture of it and put it on Instagram, it's very low friction. It's very
mhm,
easy to do that. Instagram is free. And then like what happened was in January of 2020, I had to get on Facebook. I don't really like Facebook, but I
Mhm.
had to go on there because my mom got me an Oculus and I had to activate it. And when I opened my Facebook, I'm like, oh, wow, that cover photo is really out of date. I just
Mhm.
want to throw something on there. So I threw an image up of one of my drawings.
Mhm.
And like the next day, someone in my network messaged me and was like, how much? And I was like, are you
Wow.
what? And they're like, it's beautiful. I want to buy it. And I'm like, well, you can have it. Like they were like, no, let me buy it. And I was like, well, I don't know, like that's not what this is about.
Mhm.
So I said, how about this? Because right after that,
Mhm.
other people started messaging me. I was like, do you sell your work? It was like it it actually sent me into a panic attack and I didn't open my Facebook for 2 months
Oh
because I
my
got scared. Yeah,
God.
it started. I just the weight of like expectation and like I
Mhm.
felt like a fraud. Like, what are you doing entertaining the idea of selling something just because people want to buy it?
Mhm.
So my in March, I told the first guy, I was like, how about this? You pay for the shipping. I'll get a mailing because it was a larger piece.
Mhm.
I'll send it to you, and then you can let me know how it arrives to you. You can like be
Mhm.
my guinea pig. Tell me like give me some packaging feedback. Like let's
Yeah.
see how long it takes to get to you. So we did that, and then I didn't hear from him for a while, for like a
Mhm.
few weeks, and then he messaged me and he's like, so when the piece got to me, he opened it up and he had it laying on his bed, and his wife came home from
Mhm.
work, and she was like, "What? Like, I didn't know you were buying fine art." And he was like,
Yeah.
right, it's great, right? And she was like, we're going to get this professionally framed. And they spent $1,000 getting low glare, like museum grade glass in front. They had it professionally done. It took
Right.
6 weeks. And they sent me a picture of it in the frame. And it's like they kind of forced me to see it
Yeah.
as fine art because
Mhm.
they reflected it back to me in the way that they felt like was the respectful way to present it. And when I saw that people were willing to invest $1,000 in just framing my work, is like, how much more convincing do I need that there, even if I look at a piece and think like, well, that was nice because the process is for
Mhm.
me. And
Right.
once it's done, it's done. It's like that. I had my time with it,
Mhm.
and the idea that it can have a second life or it can have a completely new life at all, I had to really really be pushed into that.
Mhm.
So it was also the fact that these, like, the people who were initially reaching out to me were like people who collect art.
Yeah.
These are friends of mine who are like informed about art, and a lot of them are LGBT like I am.
Mhm.
And so it's really important for them to, like, they have that radar for up and coming LGBT artists because they want to collect that art in particular.
Right.
And it's like, okay, if it's it's like in a past life I was a
Mhm.
songwriter, and there were plenty of times where I wrote songs that I thought were
Mhm.
crap, that
Mhm.
there was someone who loved it.
Yeah.
Someone loved it, and I'm like, okay, it's like 3 chords and it's kind of dumb, and I wrote it in 5 minutes, and it's like, because I did it as a work of catharsis, and it's like, well, duh,
Yeah.
Jackson, that can apply to this. It applies to all art. We don't love everything we create, but
Mhm.
it's a big world out there, and there's going
Yeah.
to be one person. There's probably one person that's going to see it. It's going to
Mhm.
speak to them,
Mhm.
and it's theirs now. Yeah,
Right, right.
yeah,
I think that's amazing, especially in the general sense that you did all of this for yourself. You did it
yeah.
with your best interest in mind. And I think that's the healthiest way to go about this process. So many artists are stuck in this idea I have to do it this way, I have to do it that way, I got to follow this, I got to follow that. It's not really about that. And I think you're a perfect example of what it could be for so many more artists when you really just take the initiative and you work for yourself.
Hmm.
Um, you did mention though, going back to Facebook, that
Hmm.
we're not great fans of Facebook.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about how social media has helped you in the sense, aside from being reached out, of promoting your work, and maybe some advice that you could give to artists who aren't necessarily so keen on using social media.
I am one of those artists. I'm
Yeah.
not keen on using social media. And it's, it's one of the reasons why I'm talking to Elizabeth. Like, there are people out there who want to help you. I have an arts administration background, museum studies.
Mhm.
And it's like, again, duh, Jackson, there are people who have their degree in this who want to do this work, and they want to do this work for artists that they in particular feel connected to. And
Mhm.
I relearned that lesson, or was like reminded of it, when I met you, because
Mhm.
you were there on opening night.
Yeah.
And one of the first things we connected about was an arts administration background.
Mhm.
And it's like, oh, right. Like, I'm just on the other side of it now, which
Right.
is very strange. But I'll say about Facebook, when that connection happened, when the first handful of people reached out to me, these were not strangers. These are people that I already had a personal relationship with, even though we
Mhm.
live 1,000 miles apart,
Right.
and we haven't seen each other in person for a really long time.
Mhm.
It would be just as if I had, like, sent an email out to friends and family and said, like, hey, I don't know if you guys have been wondering what I've been up to, but, like, this is how I've been dealing with the pandemic. I know you guys are wondering what it's like in New York City, and this is what it looks like for me. I could have just as easily done that if I felt like, reaching out to my network. So it's almost like I don't want to give credit to Facebook. It just happened to be the way that
Interesting.
the people who care about me found out what was going on.
Mhm.
Um, but I could have tapped into that same network of people, like I said, through email, or
Right.
through any other means of that people were like trying to connect with each other during the pandemic.
Mhm.
Yeah, if that makes sense, because like since then, even when I post on Instagram, I turn off the button that says post to Facebook, because I don't like opening Facebook. So I don't want to give a reason for engagement, because then I
Mm.
set an expectation, and then people send me messages and they wonder why I'm not messaging them back. So
Right.
I can get overwhelmed by multiple channels of
Mhm.
communication. So Instagram is the one that I feel comfortable with. And
Yeah.
so I try as much as possible to set the expectation that I'm responsive on this particular social media.
Right.
Yeah.
That it's interesting, and honestly, social media is very overwhelming. I don't think, I mean, me and you were very open to admitting it is completely overwhelming, but a lot of
Hmm.
people are so set on it, and it is important. It is important
Hmm.
to the, to the whole sell and marketing of your work as well, and just promoting yourself. Um, I do want to talk a little bit going into the future, coming out of 2020, now 2022, which is still ridiculous to me. And we're
Yeah.
still in a way we're stuck. It's like we're stuck. It's not as bad, but in a way it is bad. So what can we see coming from you in the next couple of months? Where are you along your journey now?
I am definitely, I was really encouraged by Superfine NYC. That was, like I said, it was a whim that I applied. It was I was really successful at that show. It was extremely validating. It was like that level up from, okay, my wife likes my art, but she's my wife. Okay, my neighbors like my art, but they're my neighbors. So like maybe,
Right.
but then it was like, oh, other artists like my art.
Mhm.
They say my art has something to say. They let me be in the
Right.
show. And then when I was at the show, people were, just watching people respond to my work. I could see it for what it was. I'm like, okay, my work is valid. My work is actually, it's commercially, was it commercially viable, or what is the,
Mhm.
it's like, it has something to say. But it's also something that people might want to hang up in their room. And so the pandemic being so financially discouraging, and having left my job right before the pandemic, and so I couldn't, like, getting unemployment benefits were a thing because I had quit my job. Like, I just did it all wrong.
God,
I
please.
Yeah, like, after that show, and it was just like 4 days, I was able to pay my rent from selling one piece of work. And I cried because it had been at that point, well over,
Yeah.
yeah, it was 2 years. It was 2 years since I had made any amount of money that like I could really speak to and say like this actually had like an impact. And I wasn't expecting that. It was a thrill just to be surrounded by other artists. Like the imposter syndrome was just starting to wear off because I was surrounded by established artists who were going, oh wow, and like, wait, this is your first show? And their reaction more than anything was it really really eroded that idea that like I don't really belong here and I'm a total fraud. It's like I can't be. If other artists are saying I'm an artist, that's what an artist is. It's when other artists say you're an artist. And I wasn't looking for that validation. I got it. And so after Superfine, I applied for DC. So I'm going to do Superfine DC in April, and I'm going to do Superfine NYC again in the fall. And I'm feeling optimistic, even with the virus and everything. Like back when I was a musician, it was festivals. That's how you made your money. And this is how artists make their money. It's the art fairs. And one of the artists that my booth was nearby is an LA artist who's very well established. And he walked up to me at one point and he was like, I just learned that this is your first art fair. And I was like, yeah. And he's like, so how are you collecting, when people buy a piece, are you taking down their email? And it was just very immediately coaching. And that was a validation more than, oh, wow, your art is great. He didn't say that. He said, how are you taking down this information? Like it was a foregone conclusion. Like he was already treating me like I was like a part of the club. And I said, yeah. And I've been, I know that like a gallery is important and like talking to gallerists. And he goes, here's the thing. They're going to come to you. You're not going to need to find a gallery. You need to be prepared for galleries reaching out to you. And that kind of immediate support, again, like really validating. So when I think about long-term goals, I think like what he was almost saying implicitly is just keep doing what you're doing. You don't have to change your behavior. If you weren't looking for galleries before, well, clearly that's not what's making you successful. You putting yourself into the creation and focusing on the creative process clearly is what's working for you. Yeah,
absolutely.
So more creating, and I do have some art fairs on the calendar.
Well, I'm definitely so excited to see what this year is going to bring. And I just love how your entire journey is just about you being your own best friend in all of this and being the biggest supporter. And it's funny at the same time because we're also our worst enemies. We're also the ones that put it in our head that we need this, we need that. And you overcame that all on your own. Like, hello, oh, God, amazing, Jackson.
It's like I don't want to say that good things come from the pandemic, but it's also Isaac Newton created calculus during his pandemic, and he wasn't doing that because he was trying to invent a new way to think about. He was self-soothing.
But you know what? It's weird because in a sense too, the pandemic sucked, right? We all could agree on that, but the thing is, we find the silver linings in all of it. That for you, amongst other artists too, it's like a new beginning in a way. It kind of put the reset button on everybody, it seems, and it's leading everyone in this like total like different life path and for the better. So, Absolutely. It's amazing, Jackson.
It's a rebirth.
I'm so happy. Yeah, exactly. A rebirth for sure.
Birth is trauma, and this has been traumatic. We're born out of trauma, and so we are reborn out of trauma. It makes sense.
What a way to end that. I could agree with that one. Well, Jackson, thank you so much for talking with me today. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, likewise. This has been a blast, and I look forward to doing more with you.
Thank you. Okay.